stage where I look better with my clothes on.
Next up, we have Mr. Jayroe, and we actually just met in the back. And surprisingly, we have some family ties. I can't wait for you guys to hear it.
Oh, good evening. Thank you for having me tonight. I'll say, it's a little warm up here on stage. I'm United Methodist, but my mama was Baptist, so I got enough nervous in me to make me sweat. So if I have to pull out a handkerchief, excuse me. We were born right here in Georgetown. My family, my dad's family, they were first here in 1711. We first had them showing up here. He was, my grandfather was a minister. He was growing rice on the Santee Delta. My other sides of the family, my mom's family, they've been here roughly about 85 years, but 200 years ago, they were building boats in Southport, North Carolina, where they were selling them in Georgetown, sending them on the Waccamaw River, which was called the Georgetown Highway at the time. And so we all ended up here in Georgetown. Actually, I think Mom and Daddy may have been cousins. I heard stories of some of the Jayroe men went to Southport and married some girls with the last name Hewitt, and that's my mama's family. So jokingly we tell them I think you're cousins. We grew up out on Bienvenue Plantation out on the PD River. It was part of the barony of the Duke of Beaufort. It paired up with Georgetown, which was called Richfield at the time, and Springfield. So Bienvenue was originally called Waterfield, so all this was part of that barony. My grandparents, they bought it in 1934. They bought it as a farm to raise 10 children on. Back then, my grandfather had passed away at a very young age when my dad was 5. And so my grandmother was there to have to take care of these children, and she was working this plantation as a farm out on the PD River. Growing up out there was different, was totally different. I'll tell y'all, it sounds like kind of funny when I say this, but I was the only kid out there, and I didn't realize up until the time I was at Bynum School in the 2nd grade that was a difference between black and white. I didn't know I was white. I was like, I didn't know any other kids in the neighborhood, just aunts and uncles. And growing up out there, it was really funny because imagine you're living on a piece of land with 7 brothers and sisters and their spouses, all on their own piece of property. Now, one aunt, very particular, very, very like the house a certain way. She lived in the plantation house, wanted a certain way. Another aunt, let me tell you, if you went to her house and if you used the same spoon for rice and for the beans, you may as well go ahead and go home. She ain't putting up with that. You don't use the same spoon for both. And then another one that I remember, she was rather glamorous. She was tall and red-haired. Her name was Eileen. She looked like Lucille Ball. And she would, every New Year's Eve, she would walk out into the field in her Agner leather boots, her long silk skirt, and she would take a .22 rifle and boom, 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 right there New Year's Eve every year. That was the tradition back then. So this dynamic of all these women and these men out there was really kind of crazy growing up as kids. We had a strong connection to the plantation area of the PD. I can tell you where is shallow enough in the PD that at low tide you'll be right here in water, and it's all sandy bottom in different areas. We'd go back into some of these areas and we'd find the remnants of old rice fields, the trunks, old rice mills that people forgot about when people made their living back there in these rice mills and stuff, shipping all this rice and everything out of here. I know that my dad, he was the same people that he would talk about were the same people that taught him as a little boy where these ruins were, and he took me when I was about 10 years old around and showed me. I don't even know if you can see them now. They're probably covered up with pine straw and everything. But we had a great respect for the people out there. I remember Miss Missy. Miss Missy, she lived in an old church. And Miss Missy, she still had the tradition of sweeping her yard every day. And I can remember as a child, she would have long skirts on down to the floor. She would look at me every time I went out into the house, and she liked to kind of play with me a little bit when I was a little boy. And she'd say, "Mr. Kevin, give me them shoes, boy." And I was scared of her because I thought she could steal my shoes from me every time I went out there. But Miss Louisa, she lived at Black Banks. And Miss Louisa, she forgot how old she was. They thought she was over 100 years old. The newspaper did a story on her. And Miss Louisa, she would always pick her up in the car to take her to church, and she'd be smoking a corncob pipe. And she'd look at me, and I'd be in the back seat in a little sailor suit on going to church with Mom and Daddy. and she'd say, Mr. Kevin, I said, yes, Miss Reason. She'd say, is my tan all right? Which is her wig. And she'd always want me to make sure she looked good before going into church. We knew stories of people like Murphy Carr. Murphy Carr was a man that lived out in Springfield Plantation, and he's the man that had a lot of stories of this time period out there. And Murphy would always tell Daddy, he said, one thing that you could do if you want to see spirits, if you want to see the ghost walking around you, you put your face between a horse's ears. That's why horses get spooked. They see ghosts. So if you want to see those spirits. We had all funny stories. We had tragedy stories. We had Mr. Norman. Mr. Norman, he worked out at Weymouth Plantation with my daddy, the same place where my mama's daddy had been killed, being mistaken for a deer, back in the early 60s. But Mr. Norman, one night, Daddy was out in the rice fields, and a storm came up. And Mr. Norman was so worried about Daddy, he went out into the fields to try to find him. But Daddy came back to land, went back out to find Mr. Norman, but Mr. Norman never made it back to land. So there was these stories of tragedy along with the funny things. He'd been hit by lightning at that time. So, all this stuff sort of wound together, made an incredible childhood. I thought about Aunt Ora, who my mom would always talk about. Aunt Ora would get out there to help out my grandmother after my grandfather was killed. And so she was there to help her and to help her raise her 4 children. Thought about Miss Funny tonight. Miss Funny, my daddy would always tell me the story how she came to help my grandmother after her husband passed away on my dad's side. And Miss Funny, when she was pregnant at the same time that my grandmother was pregnant. And so she was out there prior to my father's father passing away. But she was helping out my grandmother. They both got pregnant. Well, they both named their children Mildred Irene. They both decided we're going to name our children exactly the same names. So I always thought it was this connection. There was always this real strong connection out there. And I think it was a beautiful way to grow up with music, life, love. But like Mama said, always smell the flowers and eat the ice cream. I think about Georgetown. We own the tour company here in town, and I always tell people, Georgetown's like the tide. We keep coming back. We've been through all these different times of rice and indigo and enslavement, Revolutionary War, Civil War, the Industrial Revolution, the Great Depression. Everything, we just keep coming back, just like the tide. So from this guy right here, other kids came down to the low country in the summer. They may have been out in the beaches and picking up seashells, which is a great pastime. But I remember one of my favorite things would always be walking those old fields and those roads and picking up arrowheads and pieces of broken china and just thinking about the people that made Georgetown, Georgetown. Thank you all and have a good night.